Hello there, Dr. Donaldson.
How are you, Dr. Caldwell?
Very well. So thank you for giving us your time today and for sharing especially the research that you've been doing on critical colleagueship. And I'm just going to share my screen and put our agenda up here for you. So today in this brief interview, what I would like to do is for you to briefly introduce yourself, Sara, and talk about your critical colleagueship research that you've recently completed, and congratulations again. And that was just last week. You defended your dissertation.
Yeah.
And then to be relevant to our Leadership in Educational Organizations course, we wanted you to talk a little bit more about the background to the Charter and your original motivation for choosing the Charter in your practice as well as in your research. And then speaking specifically to the value of the Charter, both what your expectations were beforehand as well as what you've learned since in your actual implementation of the Charter in your practice and in your research. Finally, the fourth item would be both tips and caveats to using the Charter in various educational contexts, and that would be, I think, of special value to our students in the LEO course, and also in value to the discussion that we'll be doing in session 3. At the end, we're going to pose a couple of questions to the students, and I'll return to this screen for them, but we're going to be asking students to make a connection between the video and what you're sharing now and the 3 short videos in session 3 of the course, which actually you brought into the course last year as a TA last summer. And then what Dr. Borkowski wanted us to think about and to encourage the students to think about, and what you suggested was that for students to think about in their own context and problem of practice, whether or not they'll be leading a group or a team, and that distinction will be clear after you complete question A. And then with that in mind, how might you work as a leader to shift the mindset of the people in your organization towards working more as a team? And with that, I'm just going to briefly remind students of what the Charter looks like. It was shared in session 2 of the course, and they have access to that. So now that they've seen that, I will hand the microphone, so to speak, over to you and ask you to introduce yourself. And again, as I said, talk about your work in critical colleagueship.
Great. Thank you. So I am a member of the 2015 cohort, and as Dr. Caldwell just said, I defended my dissertation last week. So outside of the EDD program, I work as an adjunct faculty member and clinical educator at Roger Williams University School of Education in Rhode Island. And I also work as a consultant supporting practicing teachers in pre-K up through 12th grade, mostly around mathematics instruction. I work with teachers, special educators, instructional coaches, and school principals on just helping them feel more successful with their math teaching and learning in their schools. So my POP was connected to this and focused on elementary teachers struggle to really promote deep understanding and critical thinking and students' ability to apply their math skills and knowledge to higher level content and real-world problems, so the skills that they really need to be successful in the 21st century knowledge economy. When I started down the road to developing my intervention for this POP, I was really looking to try to develop a self-sustaining professional development structures and systems in districts, as opposed to typical kind of top-down PD opportunities where someone comes in and puts in knowledge into the teachers or teaches them the new way to do it. So I really wanted a self-sustaining system that's really kind of coming from the teachers and spreading out, it ended up being from the mathematics coaches, school-based math coaches in the district, so that they could set up the structures and systems and then spread that out to the teachers that they work with, to the principals and district leaders, to just really help provide ongoing job-embedded support through the development of their sense of agency and their ability to collaborate with each other to promote learning and strengthen their what I call collective mathematics efficacy for teaching, or their perceptions of their collective capacity to support student learning, to teach math effectively, and to support their own learning and the learning of their peers. So that was kind of how I came to this piece, I guess.
Right. And I think as we're listening, we can all see that although you're working in a math context, that the themes are consistent across contexts, whether they're in K through 12 higher ed, internationally. I think it's all relevant. So could you now speak to your expectation of the value of the charter within that work, and especially thinking about going from a top-down approach to a more organic approach, and then what the actual results were? So your perceived or expected versus the actual.
Yep. So when in my literature reviews, work of people like Thompson, McDonald, 2005, and Booth, 2012, they talk about the fact that communities that support learning and change don't just happen. They have to be really carefully crafted and cultivated, and that a part of that is really establishing clear expectations and structures for communication and collaboration. And without that, individuals won't feel safe opening up their practice. They won't feel safe engaging in critical analysis of their practice or providing honest feedback to other people. And it's this critical discourse is what Lord 1994 terms critical colleagueship. So it's really the critical colleagueship is the development of people's willingness and ability to engage in critical discourse. It allows them to really look at and value multiple perspectives. And this is what in the learning sciences, where they talk about creating your cognitive disequilibrium. And it's that cognitive disequilibrium that promotes learning and promotes change in your thinking and your behaviors. So you really have to have that trust before you can kind of test each other and question each other, and before you can benefit from really kind of engaging in critical thinking with each other. So thinking in my intervention planning, I put these elementary mathematics coaches together into collaborative inquiry teams that were pretty self-driven, but I needed to get them to really work together as an interdependent team as opposed to just a group of individuals that were coming together to accomplish tasks. So I needed them to really become a team. So it was a shift in their work habits. And this came up a lot in kind of education research, but it also came up in a book that I read last year by Adams and colleague. It was a 2017 book called The Loyalist Team, and I can send the information to Karen so she can share it with you. But these is a group of women, which is fabulous, love strong women, but they come from a bunch of different backgrounds and mainly work in businesses. So they're not, one of them has an education background, the rest do not, but they work in businesses, from small businesses to huge international corporations. And their book, The Loyalist Team, talks about some of the key characteristics of teams, what they call loyalist teams, that are really high-functioning, effective teams that work effectively over long periods of time. Some of the characteristics are that they put the team agenda first before their own individual agendas. They discuss challenges as they arise. They're committed to each other's success and recognize that individually they each have an impact on the other people's behavior and outcomes of their work. And the last thing is they really hold each other accountable without a reliance on a specific leader. So you really can almost take the leader out of the picture and they'll still work really well together and hold each other accountable. So that's really where the the charter comes in, is helping to establish those really clear expectations, so that the Charter for Collaborative Norms, as the CATME calls it, which is, you know, the charter that you have in your course is on that the CATME Smarter Teamwork website, and that it's really a social contract that helps to clarify expectations, and it really enables that shared accountability and interdependence, and makes it so that that team members can really feel comfortable calling each other out when they're not holding up their end of the charter, when they're not doing what they as a team agreed that they needed to do to function effectively.
Which is kind of what a leader might
So I think that's kind of
role that, yeah, sorry to interrupt, but that's probably what we would all just turn to the leader and expect the leader to, in whatever capacity, for them to take that over. But yeah, I think that's a really good illustration. And so can you speak a bit to your findings with your research and or actually in any context, because you had used it prior to doing your dissertation.
Right, so I've used it, used it some before doing my dissertation, and I've used it more explicitly since then with other groups of teachers. But from, I guess, kind of hard data from my intervention, I had 4 teams of coaches in my intervention, and each team had 4 to 6 people in it. And of those 4 teams, 2 of them progressed to advanced stages of critical colleagueship according to Van Etz's 3-stage rubric, which is like beginning stage, intermediate stage, advanced stage. So 2 of the 4 teams advanced to that, progressed to that advanced stages. And a couple of things differentiated those 2 teams from the other 2 teams which did not progress to advanced stages of critical colleagueship. And one was all 4 teams established a charter. At the 2 teams that progressed to advanced stages, they not only established it, but they referred to their charter every single time they had a meeting. So whether they were in-person meetings or online meetings, they referred to it every time. They reviewed their roles, they reviewed their norms, they went through their agenda, they made sure they were really clear on what was going on. And the other thing that connected to that was I analyzed their group meetings using Key and G's 2009 coding for discussion content around knowledge construction and teamwork coordination. And these 2 teams that progressed to advanced stages, they spent a significant amount of their team discussion time was spent on teamwork coordination. So about 40% of their interactions were around coordinating as a team, and that included establishing and clarifying goals, coordinating meetings and visits they were having with each other, and making sure that everyone on the team agreed on and understood what their next steps were and what their expected deliverables were between then and their next meeting. And the other 2 teams spent very little time on teamwork coordination, less than 20%. So that was a big difference between those. So they really used their charters effectively. And then kind of on the outcome side of that, those 2 teams that progressed to the advanced stages of critical colleagueship, when challenges and barriers to their work were brought up in their conversation, those 2 teams, about 80% of the time, they collaboratively problem solved around those issues and tried to work through those issues. And they engaged in what P&G code as allocentric collaboration, meaning that they synthesized ideas, they probed ideas, they challenged each other's ideas, and that's really a higher level of knowledge construction. And the other 2 teams that did not progress to these advanced stages of critical colleagueship, they spent very little time in the higher levels of knowledge construction. They mainly just were sharing out ideas with each other or sharing experiences from their own individual sites. They weren't doing any of that synthesizing and probing of ideas. And they only engaged in collaborative problem solving around issues and challenges about 20% of the time. And they either just kind of empathized with each other with these issues or just completely ignored them most of the time.
Yeah, it's interesting to me, especially that something that seems so basic, and that I know one of your teams looked at and said, we don't need this. And I don't know what I'd like to hear your thoughts on what was behind that observation. But yeah, this framework, and I've put the latter 4 questions up there if you wanted to refer to them. But in our next section, I wondered if you could talk about tips, but also caveats to think about when you do each of us is going to face someone who said, are you kidding me? I don't need to answer these questions. Come on, we're all professionals, we're all adults, etc. So with that in mind, could you speak to some tips that you think are important to think about if and when our students in Leo are going to use this in their own context or in the EDD program as they move forward?
Right. So I think the collaborative discussion around these questions is really important. So it's not enough for team members to just individually go in here and put their own notes. That part of this establishing this charter, this social contract, is you have to do it collaboratively, and you having those proactive discussions around these questions ahead of time then really opens it up so when an issue comes up, they can say, well, remember our conversation we had here. So as opposed to a leader standing up and saying, here are the norms you're going to use for your discussion today, or here are the rules for what's going on, that you've come up with these expectations together and everyone's agreed on them, and kind of putting out their own ideas in there. And I think about it, I was telling Karen earlier today that I think about when I work with teachers especially in the elementary grades, but middle school too, anytime you're putting students together into groups to work on an activity, that good teachers always proactively talk through potential issues. Like, what do we do if everybody wants to be the scribe and use the marker? How do we deal with that? What do we do if everyone wants to go first? How do we deal with that? What do we do if people don't agree with each other's ideas? And you do that kind of proactive work with your students, those of you that are in K-12, but we forget that we need to do that kind of proactive work with adults, because we all come to meetings with different expectations and different past experiences. And if you can put them out there ahead of time and talk through them, it really makes it so that when the problems arise, number one, you've already talked to them so you have a solution for it. But number two, you've already opened up that trust and dialogue with each other, so it's easier to talk through things when they arise, because things are going to happen, and then you can work through them instead of just ignoring them or just being like, oh yeah, I know you missed the meeting again, I totally understand, whatever the issue was, and kind of having that resentment internally because you don't feel comfortable saying anything to the people about it.
Yeah, I can certainly see the value, even as a teacher myself formerly of a lot of English as a foreign language learners. I often talked about the language of interaction and negotiation and disagreement in group situations. And I had them establish their ground rules, but all of those ground rules were based on their culture. And in many cases, they had difficulty disagreeing. So I taught them the language around that, but I didn't really give them a framework to negotiate that, to talk about we have to disagree. That's how we move forward. So I think if I were working with those students again, I would use this framework as well, in addition to here's the language that you need to interact effectively in a group. Okay, so that's very, very helpful. Is there anything else you wanted to add in terms of tips and caveats?
No, I don't think so. I think.
Okay, yeah, you covered a great deal.
Those are my key things. Really being proactive. I think the charter allows you to really be proactive around issues, and helps really develop that collegial trust that you have to have in order for learning and change to occur.
Yeah, I really like the flexibility of it too, because it doesn't negate the role of a leader, no matter what type of leader you are. And as you know, we're in deep in session 2 right now, and there are just so many theories coming at us, but it doesn't negate that role at all. It accepts that, but it also adds a structure. As you said, whether there's a leader there or not, the framework seems to function really well. So Sara, I have these 2 questions up here, and you added the second one. The first one is just related to the 3 great little meaning short YouTube videos that you provided last summer. And since you know that content so well, I wondered if you could speak of these 2 prompts to encourage our students to consider as they move forward.
Right, so the 3 videos, 2 of them are, one of them is just a quick little kind of cartoon shorts showing teams versus groups, which, just kind of fun to look at. Another one really just, the second one will lay out some of the key differences between a group and a team. And then the third one is by Robert Dufour, who those of you that are in the K-12 space, I'm sure know Robert Dufour. He's got a ton of research and workshops and books out there, and he lays out what he sees as the key differences between those. So those videos are really going to help you kind of think about what are the key differences between a group and a team. And you'll see interdependence and that kind of agency are 2 of those key pieces there. So, thinking about how does this idea of developing this charter for collaborative norms, this social contract, how does that connect to the differences between a group and a team? And then the second one is just kind of thinking about in your own work. So in my work before I started my intervention, I had a discussion with these math coaches in the district that became my participants and asked them whether they thought they were working as a group or a team of elementary mathematics coaches for the district, and whether the grade level teams of teachers that they were supporting as instructional leaders at their school were working as a group or a team. And they said that they were definitely working as a team and that the teachers that they supported were also working as a team. One of the key reasons they gave was that in both cases, they were coming together to accomplish tasks that were set up for them by somebody else. That they really, they were like, you need to create this, or you need to analyze this data, or, that kind of thing. So, but it was always coming from somebody else, and they were put together to accomplish that specific task. And I asked them how they thought they might shift their own work collaboratively as instructional coaches, as well as the work that they were doing supporting the teachers at their teams. So we've kind of put this out there for them. Thinking about that. And they also watched these short videos. So this was kind of came from a workshop that I did with them. And I've done this exact work with other groups of people that I've been working with.
Oh, that's great. I'm going to ask you a question here in just a moment, but I wanted to let the listeners know, the students, that coming up, they're going to be looking at some case scenarios related to international settings. But you don't have to actually think about international settings, but we all work with people from different backgrounds, even age groups that are different that we have to deal with. So I wanted you to think about the diversity in your own context as well. And Carrie, Dr. Borkowski, also encouraged us to think about how this charter might help us as EDD students. And I know that I've had some challenging experiences as a group member. And I emphasize group ahead of the videos and, in relation to what you just said. So I think that this is a really helpful tool as you move forward. When you're in other classes and you're assigned to do group work, you might want to bring this in, whether the students are familiar with it or not. So the final question I wanted to ask you, Sara, is if you could speak to that caveat that we raised about people being resistant to it, and what was the role of the leader in your dissertation study in addressing that factor where people were resistant, that one group was resistant?
Right. So we had one of the 4 teams at the initial meeting when they were asked to create their charter. They decided as a group. Am I using that term specifically? But as a group, they decided they didn't really need to do this collaboratively. Everybody could just fill their own information in. They're all professionals and adults. Everybody would act appropriately. And then the next day they had time at a meeting where they needed to determine their shared SMART goal for their collaborative inquiry work. And they had a lot of issues during that meeting, people talking over each other, people feeling that their ideas were not being valued, people feeling left out of the conversation completely, and had an individual leave that meeting saying, I don't see how this is going to work. I was all excited to be able to work with these other people, but I feel completely devalued leaving this meeting. I think I'm just going to go back and do my own thing and not engage in this. And so the following meeting, we had a facilitator sit with their group, and they went back through the charter and just really worked through those questions with them. And that was one of the two groups that ended up progressing to advanced stages of critical colleagueship, and that probably the group that relied on their charter the most throughout the whole 6-month process. So they're going back and really taking the time to talk through those issues and to use that charter as a tool for having those, that just really as a social contract. I think they definitely were the ones that used it most. This was the contract we set up together. We're going to refer to it every single time we meet. And they did, and it was amazing, the shift in their ability to work together.
Great. Yeah, thanks so much for your contributions, because it's truly a lived experience. It's something you've gone through by testing out yourself and then finding the research behind it. And it became a core element of your research, didn't it? It became a big learning point. I know from being familiar with your research for the last 3 years, and I know Dr. Borkowski has commented on this, that this really struck us as kind of an aha moment where, why didn't we think of this first? Why haven't we known about this structure? So the website that's in the footer that you provided, plus the experience that you provided, I think will be a really good structure to share with the students in the course, not only to link to leadership, but for their own practice, their POP, all of those areas. And so congratulations once again on being Dr. Donaldson.
Thank you. And I just leave by saying, Karen, that when going into it, I put the charter there kind of as, just to set up some norms, and did not realize how vitally important that charter was going to become in there. So, it's something that I always set up collaborative norms anytime I'm working with a group, but this took that to, another step, and it definitely was a very important step to the success of the teams that ended up being the most successful in developing themselves as a team.
Mm-hmm. That's great. It's funny how those things happen when we're doing our dissertations or other types of work. So thanks again for that. And if you wouldn't mind just giving me the list or your references, if you could just give me the names of the people you referred to, I'll prepare a list of references and share them with the students, because I'm sure they'd appreciate that as well. And thank you once again.
You're welcome.
And congratulations. I'm going to sign off as well, so I will talk to you later.
Great. Thank you.
Okay, thanks again.